All right, let's go ahead and get started. I am so excited about this class. This is really cool. So let me go ahead and get my screen all set up. Share a little bit of documents here. All right. Okay, so this is our workshop. I'm Erik. I'm the co-founder of the Tech Academy. This is me. Although, look, I'll be honest, picture was taken a little while ago. I get a little more gray in my hair, but I still do smile a lot because life is good. So I'm a senior level software developer. That covers a lot of ground. I've done a lot of different things. I'll get into a lot of stories about the different types of roles there are in technology, the kind of experience I have, and that the people I've worked with have had. But I've been working in technology for decades. As I mentioned earlier, when before the class formally started, I was in the Navy for 6 years. I operated nuclear reactors. More about that in a little while. Did electronics and high-level math and operated ships out in the middle of the ocean and all kinds of stuff. It's coming. A lot of it's coming pretty helpful. And I'm the co-founder of the Tech Academy, a software developer boot camp. We put on these classes for free to educate people, to help bridge the gap between people and technology, and to let people know about who we are and what we do. We do have an assistant on the line for every one of these classes. Regina is in there. You'll see her in the mix in chat. And she's there to help with all things behind the scenes, but primarily to monitor the chat and to answer questions. She's super helpful. I will note that if we have any problematic students, which rarely happens, she will boot them so the rest of you can enjoy the class. And we do make good use of chat. I want to clarify something here. Many of us have used Zoom before. I use it on the daily basis, right? We're using a version of Zoom that also has a Q&A function in addition to chat. Please stay well away from the Q&A section. We're just not monitoring it. So if you have questions, just go to chat and choose hosts and panelists and ask your question or say what you need to say. And Regina will be watching that and be able to help. Now, most of you have already done this, but we've had a few later arrivals. I'd like everybody to go into chat right now. And if you haven't already, let me know where you are joining us from. Please put that in and just go ahead and tell me exactly how cold it is where you are. So go ahead and go to chat and let me know where you're calling or joining us from and whether or not it's like Antarctica right now. David Mervine says it's 22 degrees. Oh, you're in Oregon. I've got many friends in Oregon. It's miserable right there. New York State, 14 degrees. Woo! Yeah. Rob Ryder's in Beaverton, Oregon. That's where I moved when I got out of the Navy 30 years ago. Now you're making me feel old. Excellent. Oh, I think Shoab has his beat. Shoab says, hi from Toronto, Canada. It is minus 10 degrees. Oh, Celsius. Oh, man, that's miserable. Okay, good. So we got people from all over the country. We're all enjoying the Arctic chill. But let's put all that out of our minds. And for the next hour, we're going to learn a bunch of really cool things about the pros and cons of the tech industry. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Ravender. It's 55 degrees in San Jose. Not surprising. I'm from San Francisco originally. Okay, so that's a little bit of info about chat. Here's the basic agenda. We'll have a brief explanation of the Tech Academy, who we are. We're going to do our workshop, which again, I'm just really excited to give today. One of our attendees mentioned, before the class started, one of the things she was interested in is getting the actual pros and cons, like an objective sort of viewpoint about the technology industry. And I'm going to endeavor to give you that with unvarnished, like stripped bare kind of look at what's really good and what's really bad about the tech industry, so you can make an informed decision. So that's going to be our workshop. Time permitting, we'll have a brief Q&A. But even if we don't have time for a Q&A at the end, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, you'll have an opportunity to be able to email in any questions and we respond to those. After that, we'll give you a little bit of data about our coding boot camps, and there's a free gift at the end. And people really enjoy these. If you stick around at the end, you're going to get something really, really cool. So briefly, who are we? Who's giving this class? Well, you probably saw on Eventbrite or Meetup that the account is under the Tech Academy. We're a coding boot camp. We were founded 10 years ago. In fact, 10 years ago and 3 weeks, in 2014, we provide cost-effective, self-paced online certification programs. And that self-paced is pretty unique. We'll talk about that more later on. One thing about our boot camp, we're not unique in this, but we've got a little bit of special sauce. We really have our finger on the pulse of what the technology industry actually needs, what they're hiring for. And so we teach in-demand skills, but we also care about your long-term tech career. More about that later on. Our tuition is under the national average. In fact, well under. We have boot camps that start at $5,300. I think the national average is about $12,000, $12,500. And I want to read this next part verbatim because it matters so much to us and like why we even do what we do, what all of our staff have on their minds as they do your job. This is the mission of the Tech Academy. Our mission is to graduate entry-level technology professionals that excel in the basics of their field and thereafter have successful careers in the tech industry and whose actions raise industry standards and surpass client expectations. That's what we're all about. Our product is you working in technology. If you'd like information about us and who we are, you can grab the link that Regina just put into chat and fill out a very, very quick form there, and we'll get you more information about who we are. For those of you who are interested in that, I'm going to pause for about 60 seconds, give people a chance to go to that link and fill it out if they'd like to, and then we're going to jump into our material. I'm going to grab a little bit of water because I've been talking a fair bit. All right, so let's move on. What is this class and what isn't it? A lot of the classes we do are coding classes. We'll actually teach you some fundamentals of coding and you'll write, computer programs. That's not what this is. What we do here is we are going to go over some complex terms related to the technology industry. I'm going to do my best to explain those simply. And especially when it comes to the industry itself, I'm going to explain some of the fundamentals of the industry without throwing a bunch of jargon in there. We're going to explain things in plain English, okay? So that's what you can expect. Good explanations of the fundamentals, the pros and cons in language you can understand, and we're not going to write any code. If you are interested in code writing, we do offer every single week we have a free coding class, and you'll get links to that later on. Those are a lot of fun, and you can attend those and get your hands dirty, figure out whether you like coding. All right, so let me break from this, and let's get into our material. Okay, so the pros and cons of the technology industry and specifically of working in the technology industry. There's a whole other discussion we could have about just the pros and cons of technology. And this is actually one of the central things I want to talk about before we get into a bunch of the nitty gritty here, is that, like it or not, the technology industry is arguably the most influential industry on earth. From a certain point of view, it's almost impossible to escape technology in virtually every aspect of your day-to-day life. And I'll tell you what, part of the reason that we care about like educating people on the industry, on how it works, about what's good and bad about working in it, is simply because whether you work in technology or not, without an orientation to what it is, how the job gets done, what's good and bad about it, like you're almost operating a little bit blind in your consumption of technology, because we touch hardware and software all day long. Like right now, within like 5 feet of me are probably 40 or 50 electronic devices. Most of them have computers in them or are themselves computers. And they're all interacting with each other to one degree or another. And they are tools that I use for various purposes, both business and personal, all the time. And I'm sure you guys are the same. So what I want to talk about today is, again, whether or not you end up working in that industry, what's good about doing that job and what's bad about doing that job. And along the way, we're going to look at the impact of technology in the world. So in terms of pros and cons, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover a set of pros and a set of cons. And I'm a pretty transparent person. I'm going to be pretty frank about some of these things. I've been doing this since I was 11. I've developed some opinions. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. They're just one dude's opinions. But I'm not going to shy away from telling you what those opinions are, and time permitting, let you know why I feel that way. But I just want to stress something. It's just one person's opinion. Ultimately, after this and any other research you do, it's on your shoulders to decide, am I going to endeavor to work in technology or not? That said, I think what we're going to present today will be of value, and we're going to dive into it. So here's the first con I want to cover, is that it can be challenging. Now, that's a very wide-ranging statement. I want to talk a little more precisely about what that is. So one of the things that we cover a lot in the boot camps and in a lot of these free classes that we do is that at their core, computers are really simple. And they actually are. And what I mean by that is that the actual purpose of a computer is simple. It's to take information in, process the information, and then send the information on. That's the purpose of a computer. Now, the fact is that the types of problems that we solve with computers can actually be really, really, really complex. And especially when you have many different computers working in concert to try to solve problems, it can be a very complex situation. So when I say it's challenging, here's what I mean is, even though you may have gone through a boot camp or gone through a computer science program or whatever, you broke into the industry and you know your fundamentals pretty well, when you are first given a problem to solve, it is very rarely a cut and dry, simple fix or change or building a new feature. When you have this set of interrelated systems, like lots of different pieces of software working together and or lots of computers, machines working together, when you have a situation like that, making a change at any one point in the system can have ripple effects in other seemingly disrelated parts of the system. Now, they are related, because if you make a change in one area and suddenly you see something happen in another distant area of a system, clearly there was a relationship, but it may not be immediately obvious at first glance, even to a trained professional with a lot of experience, why the change you made over in system A suddenly changed something in system G. That itself can be challenging. And tracing through all those interrelated systems and programs, here's what part of the challenge is. This is what I'm getting down to, is often when you're working in technology, you'll need to create in your mind a mental model of a relatively complex system with a good number of moving parts. And worse, you have to look at what that system does as time moves forward. Regardless of whether you introduce a change or not, systems are operating second by second, minute by minute, and there's things that happen in them. Then when you make a change, it makes it even more challenging to track the status of that system. That is challenging work. You might be sitting there. This happens all the time. We're talking about like what's a day in the life of an engineer, or a day in the life of someone who works in technology. There are times when, and I've seen this, I'm going to use myself as an example, but I see this all the time with people working in tech. I'll just be sitting there, just staring with the kind of faraway stare that would cause your spouse or loved one to say, where'd you go? Because it takes mental work to solve some of these things. Now, I'm not going to pretend, and we'll talk about this more later on, that it's, harder than physical labor. It's not the point. It's a different kind of work, but it is work. And so I don't want to shy away from that. If you look to go into this industry, it could be a challenge to deal with some of the complexities and, some of the nature of the systems you have to solve things for. Some people thrive on that. Some people don't, but it is a factor and it's undeniable. There's a second element of that though, which is very often, even on a relatively simple problem you're trying to solve, you'll make what you think is the correct fix or change. You'll write a little teeny bit of a program or fix a little bit of a program, and you are certain you got it right. You look at your code, you look at the work you did, and you're like, all right, this is going to be good. And then you run your code, you run the program, and it's not right. And you cannot, for the life of you, figure out why. I'll talk a bit more about that, later on, but that itself is a challenge, and it's not a challenge that everybody enjoys. And so I was still very upfront about that can actually, be a factor. And the final thing that can make this industry challenging is that computers are stupid. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious, but I'm not far off the mark. The fact is, despite what you might be seeing in sensationalized articles in the media, computers cannot think. They're utterly unable to think. They are simply machines that are only capable of performing some action if some technology professional put instructions into the computer to make it take that action. Now, we could have a whole nother separate conversation about artificial intelligence and how it appears to have actual intelligence and can act on its own. It can't. And in fact, you should look at our YouTube channel, which we'll give you a link to later on. We did a talk about that, just within the last week. But it's a factor. Computers are stupid. Well, how would that make this a challenging industry to move into? Well, it's this. Computers cannot embrace ambiguity. More precisely, they will only do the exact thing they are instructed to do. And if they aren't told what to do, they'll either stop or just throw an error or break, not physically break. But they must be told explicitly, exactly, with no ambiguity, what to do. It's a challenge to think in that manner. As humans, we can embrace ambiguity. We can think of ish. It's, well, how many people are going to be at the party? Well, 20-ish. Ish doesn't fly in a computer. Is it 20? Is it 23? Is it 19? We need exact data in a computer. It's a challenging environment to operate in. All right, now, what's a pro? Well, it's actually got really good work-life balance. You see things on TV or in the media that might imply that, like, working as an engineer, it can be a grind. Like you're just working your tail off to get this new product released, and you're like burning the midnight oil and 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. Never, ever once in the last 20 years have I worked anything more than about a 43 to 45-hour week ever. And my compatriots are the same. Now, it's not to say there might not be isolated instances at certain companies where they have a different idea. And I'll give you an example. Must be about 10 years ago. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I decided on purpose to spend several years being a hired gun in technology. What I mean by that is that I built up enough experience and confidence in myself that if there was a job that was short-term where they needed an expert in a certain set of technologies, that I felt comfortable throwing my hat in the ring and saying, hey, I can do those and I can do it intensively and get a good product for you on this short-term basis. So I would take short-term contracts, right? Now, what's really cool about that is you get paid better for that because, one, they needed a hired gun who had some deep expertise in an area. But two, and again, this speaks to a little bit of the cons for this specific way of running your career. I did this with, knowing what the risks were. But two, You're a contractor, and if the budget goes away, you're gone in a heartbeat. They may say they need you for 6 months or a year, but you're not a full-time employee. Now, I'm not presenting this as one of the cons on its own, just simply saying the way I had chosen to run my career at that point, it was a factor. And I did it on my own, on purpose, and I was fine with it. But here's the point is one contract was ending. I was looking around for my next contract. And I won't say the name of the company because they're still around. But a recruiter friend of mine said, hey, listen, Eric, I've got a gig. And I could tell from a tone in his voice that it was going to be an interesting conversation. He said, I've got a gig. They're paying pretty well. You might want to talk to them. And it was a company that did time tracking for medical professionals in hospitals where they can have rapid changes in manpower and scheduling and all that. It's a technical challenge of magnitude. Remember the, con one, which is it's challenging. Solving time utilization and resource utilization for people that work in a rapidly moving hospital is a challenge. And so they were going to pay really well. But I got on the phone with the actual engineering manager. And within 2.5 to 3 minutes, she had told me that they were working 75 to 80-hour weeks right now, trying to get a release out the door. And when I said, okay, like, is that a short-term thing? She paused and you could hear it in her voice. And she said, well, no, we've been at that point for 7 months. We're 7 months overdue getting this release out. I went, yeah, I don't think I'm going to take this job. Now, the reason I'm telling you this, while I've got this pro number one, work-life balance up on the screen, is because it is the exception that proves the rule. Out of probably 23 or 24 jobs I did in a very tight period of time on purpose, just moving from contract to contract, it was the only time ever that I had a conversation with a single company that had a really bad work-life balance. Every other one of them was great. Now, what do I mean by, good work-life balance? Well, here's the thing. As engineers and technology professionals, we are very valued by our organizations. Again, there's exceptions. I've seen people that work at tiny mom and pop businesses that don't understand the value of a technologist and don't pay them well, and it's not a good work-life balance. Don't do that. Virtually every company of substance that employs technology professionals has come to realize that without expert engineers and technology workers to support those engineers, they have no business. It's gone. It's over. It's dead. Here's another example. Years ago, I was working for a medical, like a healthcare company, Providence Health Plan, up there in the Northwest. And I think they might have, offices around the country. I'm not sure. But the whole point is they're a nonprofit owned by a religious organization, and fantastic place to work. I could talk for hours about what it was like with my time there, but they're pretty old school when it comes to employee standards of appearance in dress and other areas. And there was an established exact dress code at that company, except for the engineers. Wear what you want, as long as you're not embarrassing anybody. Jeans, sure, whatever. Funny, nerdy t-shirts, yeah, whatever. A Hawaiian shirt because you're a nerd, sure, whatever. Now, no one abused it. We're not idiots. But it's just to illustrate, not like, hey, we don't have to play by the rules. It really wasn't that at all. It's just that most people involved in that part in this tech industry recognize that none of that's important. What's important is that we solve really difficult problems. And if we can get that done, it's the engine behind much of the success of a company. So again, I'm not even trying to ramble here. I'm just trying to tell these stories to kind of illustrate a bit of what it's like, right? Here's a really big one that has changed a lot in the last few years, even for the better, but that was really good even, a few years ago, which is that there's a lot of remote opportunities to work in the tech industry. Now, obviously, COVID drastically accelerated that. But even before then, the industry, the tech industry itself was, gradually coming to realize that, especially with the rise of all of the tools for doing remote work, you can have a phenomenal technology team that are hardly ever in the same physical location. And now it's very common. Now, not everybody likes that. I've got a friend of mine who actually really loves going into work and being in the office. Good. He's got a job where it's like 50-50, work from home, work in the office. He loves it. Me, I love the people I work with, but I also love working from my house. I think it's great. And so I can do that. Okay. So again, I know it says work-life balance as a pro. I'm not saying that every company is exactly the same and you're always going to have a walk in the park and it's all sunshine and roses. But in general, compared to a lot of other industries, it's got a really good work-life balance. And for example, if your job is being a stonemason or a brick mason, you're never going to be able to work remotely. A surgeon cannot work remotely. I wouldn't want that. I picture going to a surgical room and the actual surgeon is halfway across the country using robots to do the surgery or whatever, right? I'm being facetious. The point is that you actually have the opportunity to work remotely, and it works great if the company is well set up for it. All right, let's look at another con. Low physical activity. It's very real to me, ladies and gentlemen. I've had at various times in my life, I've had a lot of careers, right? Operated a nuclear reactor, sold sunglasses on the roadside all around the world, owned an appliance repair company, worked at a fair one summer, sold carpet, vinyl, and tile, on and on and on and on, operated an employment firm. Like, I've had all kinds of jobs. Some of them were really physical. When I owned my own appliance company, I got to the point where I could just throw refrigerators and washers and dryers around, and I was doing pretty well. Technology is not that way. And it matters. For some of us, it's a personal thing. Some people really thrive on and want a job that has a lot of physical activity. Technology isn't that way. And there could be negative impacts from sitting around too much. It isn't really that good to stare at screens all the time, right? You can have ergonomic issues in terms of like lower back or carpal tunnel in your fingers, right? These are very real things. I mean, a lot of studies have pointed out, this is not rocket science, okay? I'm sure it doesn't surprise anybody to know that studies have found that if you have sedentary jobs and you have high activity jobs, your health is going to be better with a high activity job and you might live longer. Well, man, that's really not a point in technology industry's favor, is it? Well, no, it isn't. And yet millions of people around the world work in technology and many of them are in great health. Why? Because they go into it knowing that there are solutions. You can use a standing desk. You can take lots of breaks, take breaks, and walk around, right? You can work out when you're not working, right? There's even special equipment. My co-founder, Jack, we were talking earlier today, he doesn't just have a standing desk. He has a treadmill desk that he can walk on the treadmill while he's working, which I really admire. I don't know if I'll ever do that, but it's great, right? So this is honestly a con of the tech industry. Now, it's not just the tech industry. There's lots of jobs that have low physical activity, but it is absolutely a factor in the tech industry. All right, let's move on to another pro. It's a very creative industry. Now, this actually, for some of you, may be like, duh. For some of you, it might come as a bit of a surprise. Because when we think about machines, computers, engineering, they are soulless machines. They don't have a soul. They're not alive. They're just tools that do what we tell them to. But here's the thing. Remember that thing I said earlier about the fact that it could be a challenging industry to be in? Well, the problems that the technology industry solves in many cases are problems with a lot of different factors. And often when you as an engineering professional, when you as a computer professional are looking at the problem, or you're working with a team and you're all confronting a problem that you've been tasked with fixing, there isn't always an immediate path to a solution available. Some of the tasks you'll do are relatively routine or mundane. You've solved similar problems several times in the past. You kind of have, a general route in mind on how you'll move through and solve the problem. But often you don't have that. You're solving problems that have a great deal of ambiguity in them, or it's a relatively new problem that hasn't been solved by a lot of people. Now, I know I put this under a pro. For some people, that's not going to be something they want. That's going to be a con. They want to deal with very established patterns, knowing exactly what they're going to do in every given situation. For the right person, the creativity that sort of an open canvas represents is an area where they can thrive. I'll just take it down to very pragmatic terms. When you're given an engineering task to solve, there are usually literally 20 or 30 ways you can solve that thing. And there is no right way. Now, there are ways that are quote unquote better, but even that, how do you define better? Let me expand on that a little bit. Let's say you're creating one feature in a program and you have, let's say it's a pretty challenging thing to build, and you've got a few weeks to solve it. And in talking to your manager and representatives from other parts of the business, it's been made pretty clear that they want your best work in this area, especially with an eye towards the solution you design, the way you fix this problem will probably, one, be in place for a long time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years or longer. And two, let's say this problem you're trying to solve involves big scale. Now, what do I mean by scale? The amount of work per unit time that your solution will solve. Let's get even a little more specific. Let's say you work for a company that services tens of millions or even, billions of customers around the globe, like the Facebooks or the Googles or the whatever of the world, right? Many of the things you might work on could process tens of millions of operations per second. Now, not every engineer is ever going to work on stuff like that, but some do. The whole point is, let's say we have that situation. And again, your manager, your leadership at the business have said, Eric or Jane, whoever you are, we're giving you some room to work on this one. Because again, we want something that will be long lasting and something that can handle a tremendous scale. That's challenging work, but you're given the room to do it in. Now, 6 months down the line, same company, same engineer, you might be given a problem to solve where you just simply don't have that time. And even though some of the same considerations or concerns on the part of the business might be there, the problem to be solved, they might want it to last a long time. And it might need to serve a lot of people. There are concerns other than those, other than the actual program that you're writing, that supersede it. Because you're not making software in a vacuum. You're making software to solve a problem for a business or a group. And sometimes that business or group has to make trade-offs. And you may not be given the time that you might want as a professional to do a really, really good job. Here's the whole point about all of this. I know, again, I'm presenting this under the creative. One of the things that's really cool about the creative process is that true creativity sparks in an environment that has constraints. Unless you are given a clear playing field with rules of what you can and can't do, what the limits are, requirements, true creativity doesn't happen. We see this in technology sometimes. There's a term in technology called greenfield. This is a description of a new project you might work on. You would say it is a quote unquote greenfield project. And what does that mean? It means that there's really no limits on how you want to design it, what computer programming languages you might use, what the user interface is going to look like. It's a blank slate. Do you know that those are the worst projects to work on as an engineer? They're the hardest projects to get any consensus about how to move forward. More often than not, those projects get stuck in what's called analysis paralysis. Everybody's got some idea about, well, this would be cool if we did this. And, well, no, it would be even cooler if we did this. And I was reading online about this really cool technology. We should use that just because we can. And nothing moves forward. Simply adding the constraint of, say, and I've seen this used to great effect by managers, simply adding the constraint of, yes, it's a greenfield project, but I need a rough design of your architecture in 2 weeks, period. Whoa. Now people get really creative. And now it actually gets fun. It's less fun when it's a completely wide open playing field, which is a bit counterintuitive. But again, just trying to share a bit of what this technology industry is like. When you're given those constraints, now you can really bring to bear all of your creativity, all of your problem-solving ability. True brightness occurs in that sort of a crucible of, oh, I don't have unlimited time. I don't have unlimited resources. I do have to interact with some older systems and make it so my new project can work with them, even though they're 10 or 12 years old, which is old in technology. That's a blast. It's super creative. Now, there is also just the pure creativity of wanting to work in the front end of the technology industry, user interfaces, physical product design, where there's a digital interface. These are creative even in the design sense, but just simply even writing code or designing computer programs is a tremendously creative endeavor. All right, that's enough of that about creative. Oh, I do want to say one last thing. When you finally do solve the problem, regardless of whatever constraints and whatever you went through in the middle that can be frustrating, more on that later, the feeling of accomplishment when you and a team solve it and push that product out the door is unparalleled. Because as I said earlier, making software is expensive and it takes a long time. And when you pull that off as a team, it feels wonderful. All right, a con. You will occasionally have to burn the midnight oil. Now, I know I said what I said about work-life balance, and that's still true. The reason that you might need to burn the midnight oil is twofold. One is that in any given project you take on or are assigned, the idea that you're going to know virtually every bit of technology that you'd need to use to fix that problem or solve that issue is a ludicrous idea. The chances are pretty much 0% that you're going to know everything, right? So you're going to need to study fairly often, quite often, how to do new things. Now, some of that, a lot of it can absolutely be done on the job, which, by the way, is not true in every industry. Very often you'll get paid to learn, and that's not a bad thing. Every technologist who's been around for a while knows that on every new project, they probably only know 30 to 50% of the technologies they're going to use, and they've got to learn the other 50 to 70%. It's very common, and they're fine with it. But here's the thing. Technology is a rapidly changing field. So whether it's required for your job or not, if you want to stay up to date, you're going to occasionally need to study outside of work. Not always. It's actually relatively rare, but you're going to have to. Now, let me tell you what it can open up for you. We're going to go back to late 2010, early 2011. I've been out of the technology industry for that at that point for a while. So background is that when I got out of the service, I've been working with machines for a long time. Listen to me. I was 24 years old. Oh, it's been a long time. I was 24 years old. But when you're sitting there and your primary job is either repairing electronic equipment or sitting at a reactor plant control panel and monitoring and operating a 185 megawatt nuclear reactor over and over and over and over again for years. Look, this is a personal thing. I needed more human interaction. And so I made a calculated decision not to immediately go into a technology field when I got out of the service. I went into fields that involved people, sales, marketing. I learned phenomenal lessons. We could talk about that for a while. The lessons I learned outside of technology that have really helped me succeed in technology. That's the subject for another day. But here's the point. Jump forward to 2011. And I really wasn't winning in life. I really wasn't happy and I wasn't doing that well, economically or otherwise. And I was talking to Jack, who ended up being the co-founder of the Tech Academy. But at the time, Tech Academy wasn't even a thing, right? And I'm just going back and forth with him about this. Like, what are my options? What could I do? And he had this brilliant idea. He's like, Erik, you know technology really well. Like, why aren't you programming computers again? Huh. Why aren't I? Now, here's the thing. I hadn't looked at the technology industry for quite a number of years at that point. It had been a while. And I actually didn't know what it looked like. It had changed tremendously. I knew that. But I didn't know what it was like. So here's how we're getting to this con of burn the midnight oil. I knew I needed to make a change. I talked to a friend who's in the industry, and he quizzed me for a while, for about 45 minutes, about what I knew already, because I was thinking about going back to school or something. And he said, well, Erik, I don't know if you really need to go back to school. The more I dig into this, you know a lot of stuff. He says, what you don't know, though, is how software is being made today. What you know about the software industry is a decade to a decade and a half old in terms of how software is made. He says, I could get you into a job. He had a contract with the state. He said, I could get you into a job under me on my contract if you boned up on the following. And he listed out about 20 different things. He says, you'd have to really, really learn fast. And if you can demonstrate to me that you know these things, I can put you under, take you under my wing and get you back in. And I really had to look at it. And I had a long conversation with my wife at the time, because I realized that if I was going to do this, it meant that in addition to my regular job, I'd have to devote almost every hour I had of free time to this. And so I prepared myself for spending up to 6 months of staying up till midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and just grinding through this. And the mental decision was there. And then I went out and I got a relatively modern, laptop off of Craigslist for cheap. And then I went to, there's a store, they're around the country, Goodwill. It's one of those thrift stores. And they had a division that sold books. And I got every sort of coding book I possibly could to try to, get up to speed. And I started. And for night after night after night, it was 1 or 2 and 3 in the morning. Eyes getting tired, trying to grasp this, writing as much code as I could, just trying to get back into how does the industry look today? And I was prepared for the long haul on this. And about 2 weeks in, something went click. And I started to really get it. The next day, I put a resume out. And 4 days later, I had a job for $82,000 a year and went up from there. Now, I'm bringing this up as a con because there's going to be times where in order to stay abreast of technology, you're going to have to study after hours. You're going to have to learn. Some of you may thrive on that. You may love those weekend projects. Some of you, it may not be your cup of tea at all. Okay. But you're really going to have to dive into it sometimes. Now, I will say this, that when I made that decision about burning the midnight oil, I was already really knowledgeable technology. I'd made a ton of software in the past. When I was in the Navy, I went to the way deep down nitty gritty of computers, all the way down to the individual metal that they're made out of and everything up above it. Like I knew a lot. I just didn't know the current way software was made. And so I resigned myself, or that sounds rather defeated. I decided to burn the midnight oil. Your situation when this comes up, if you go into tech, the specifics of your situation may be a little different, but there will be times where even given good life balance, you've got to work your tail off to get up to speed. I'll end off with this. A recent example of this is AI. Look, research into AI has been going on for decades. When I was like 13 or 14, I started, learning a language called Lisp, L-I-S-P, which was an early attempt at creating rudimentary artificial intelligence programs. Had a lot of fun with that as a teenager. Yes, I'm a nerd, right? And then I've watched this, evolution of artificial intelligence over the preceding decades. But in the last 14 months, the world it's changed fundamentally in terms of artificial intelligence. And I'm telling you right now, even if you're not a programmer, you better be learning about this stuff. Okay. But if you're in technology, you better be doing whatever you can, even if your job doesn't need it, to stay abreast of the changes in AI. So I know I've gone on this one at length, but I want you to know what it's like. Yes, you have good work-life balance in general, but in order to stay up to speed, you're definitely going to have to burn the midnight oil sometimes. Also, one thing that I want to stress is I'm a bit of an unusual case in that I had all this preceding knowledge and I decided to self-teach through this. I can tell you based on our experience over the last, 10 or 12 years that if I hadn't had all that, it would have been a really challenging thing to self-teach. More on that later on, but self-teaching in terms of coding, it's tough. Okay, last thing I'm going to say on this con is that it's peripherally related, is that it's almost guaranteed that you'll struggle with what's called imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is not a technology specific thing. We've probably all heard the term, but I'm going to tell you something. In the tech industry, it's almost universal. And it's what can be really surprising to people is that it's not confined to just people who are at the beginning of their tech career. Every technologist I have ever met and talked about this with feels imposter syndrome on a regular basis. I feel it. I'll give you a specific, maybe it actually relates to AI. So it was November, what is it? 13 months ago, November of 2022, when ChatGPT, really hit the mainstream and started exploding, right? And of course I heard about it. It was impossible not to, even in those first few weeks. But as the weeks and months went by, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I didn't feel negative about it. I just wasn't interested in it. But I'll tell you, by around May of last year, I was starting to feel left behind. And in fact, I would talk to some of my compatriots, other people in the engineering field, and they would be saying things that I didn't understand. I don't like that feeling. And I'll never forget, it was a specific Zoom meeting I was in where I actually felt like an imposter. Like, here I am representing myself. as a technologist with some sort of altitude and experience. And I don't really know anything about this area. It was almost embarrassing. But I respond to those kind of things now after all these years with a tremendous drive to solve it and figure it out. By the way, shameless plug, if you go to our event page, in I think about a week or so, we've got a phenomenal class on ChatGPT that I think you'll love. That's a separate thing. Okay, so enough on that. Okay, that's a bunch of cons. Let's look at a positive. Stability and pay. Now I want to stress something. If you pay attention to the media, you might get the idea that technology jobs are unstable. The media loves to popularize negative information. I'm speaking now from the perspective of having been in and around the technology industry since about 1987. Technology as a career is incredibly stable. We'll talk about pay in a second, but here's what I mean by stability. At this point in the development of the modern Western civilization, computer technology will not decline in its use for the foreseeable future, certainly not in our lifetimes. And this part's important, despite alarmist news you might see, the role of being a computer programmer or technology worker is not going to become deprecated by artificial intelligence or robotics or any other element of the technology industry. And by the way, I'm very passionate about this. Remember when I said at the beginning of this that I've developed some opinions? I'm going to tell you exactly where this one came from. It was about 1985. I'm still a teenager, and I'm reading the San Francisco Chronicle one day. And in there is an article that some researchers at, I forget whether it was Stanford or UC Berkeley. I was close to the Bay Area, right? Which is where a lot of this stuff was going on with the computer industry. Researchers at one of those universities had successfully developed a computer algorithm, a set of instructions. They developed essentially a computer program that could itself create other computer programs. And the take that the reporter had on this news is that likely meant that within 3 to 5 years, the job of being a computer programmer would be extinct. I got to tell you, as a 15-year-old who was really into computers, that was actually kind of alarming. I'm not going to lie. I went, oh, well, that stinks. But it never happened. And it didn't happen in the mid-90s and late 90s when they predicted it again. And it didn't happen around 2009 or 10 when I last saw news about this. And it's not happening now when they say that artificial intelligence may make programmers' jobs obsolete. And it will not occur for decades, if ever. And here's why. It isn't that the programmers are needed, although they will be for a long time. It's this. Individuals who understand the fundamentals of the digital computer and how to use it to accomplish its purpose of taking in information, processing the information, and sending the information on. People who understand all those fundamentals and can use them to solve human problems, that will never go away. The form they use to create the solutions may change over time, and in fact, has changed over the decades I've been working in the industry. But the central problem to be solved of utilizing a digital computer to solve human problems of productivity will not go away. So I know it's a rather long-winded thing. Again, I want to give you a lot of data to let you know the technology industry is stable. Like any industry, it's subject to larger economic factors, and you'll have some layoffs and then hiring sprees. Like the news media loves to make light of talk about the fact that there were a bunch of layoffs at the end of 2022 and in 2023, but they never remind you that in 2020, at the height of COVID, the amount of technology job creation was insane. It was the highest in history. They don't remind you of that. They just talk about the negative. All right. And by the way, a little more specific statistics, and you can look this stuff up yourself. If you go to, it's called the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. It's a U.S. government agency, BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Every 5 years, they publish broad scale statistics and future predictions for thousands of industries. I first looked at this in spring of 2012, late 2012, early 2013, right? And the prediction then was that, yeah, that's what it was. It was early 2013. They just released the report, and it said that in the next 10 years, their forecast was that there would be 1.1 million technology jobs created over the next decade. And they said that the available production of technology professionals was 40,000 people a year, which meant in 10 years, they would add 400,000, which meant they were upside down by 700,000 jobs in their forecast. I went, oh, well, I guess this idea I have about creating a software developer bootcamp might be a good one. Flash forward 5 years. They did it again in 2018. Jack and I both went over this because at that point, he was the co-founder and we were looking at the industry. Same report, but this time it said in the next 10 years, i.e. from 2018 to 2028, 1.4 million jobs created in the technology industry. And at that point, we're only a few years into boot camps being around. And with the combination of colleges and boot camps, the industry was still only able to produce 75,000 technology professionals a year. But now we have 1.4 million jobs over the next 10 years. We're still upside down. Well, they released the same thing last year in 2023, and the numbers are the same. We are upside down. The technology shortage in technology is absolutely real. So I know I went on and on about some of the cons, and now I'm going on and on about some of the pros. This one's important. Not every sector of culture and business has stability. Technology does. And let's talk about pay. Look, I'm not a money-motivated person, but you should be compensated fairly according to the degree of value you provide. And the value of a well-trained, experienced engineer or technologist is I won't say it's incalculable because companies calculate it all the time, which is why they pay them so well. I'll give you an example. This one's fun. So this is back up to working in Providence Health Plans. So I'm sitting there in my little office space cubicle, whatever it is, a nice open floor plan and everything, but you had a little bit of privacy in your cubicle. And the cubicle right next to me, I noticed that people wouldn't just walk right in. They'd always knock and wait, even on a cubicle with no door. I found that odd. And then I looked, and this guy's cubicle, whoever it was, it had a little like 8.5 by 11 sheet on it, and it said Optimizer Prime, and it had a picture of Optimus Prime, the Transformer. It said Optimizer Prime, and it showed this robot thing, whatever. I'm like, what is this all about? So I start asking around as I'm getting used to the job and everything, and I find out this guy, his name's Steven, he's kind of standoffish and doesn't talk to a lot of people, but everybody respects him. Well, to make a long story short, over time, I befriended him and got to know him pretty well. And I found out the story behind this. He was an extremely well-paid engineer, very well paid. And I went into his little cubicle there one day and saw this thing on the wall, sort of a graph. And I looked at it and I said, Stephen, what's this? And he got this sort of sheepish look on his face because he was not an arrogant person at all. And he said, this is why they call me Optimizer Prime. Now, let me explain. There's a type of work that's done in the computer industry when you're working with databases, which is called optimizing. Now, without getting into a bunch of nerdy technology stuff, because I promised I wouldn't do that, let's just put it this way. Databases are huge collections of stored electronic data. And very often you need to extract the data from the database and do a bunch of calculations with it. Here's a basic example. Let's say you have a retail company that has 100 stores around the country. Every night, those stores could send in their sales information about sales done, what products they sold, tax collected, how many employee hours were used, the kind of stuff you'd think you need in order to run a retail business, right? Well, all that stuff would get stored in an electronic database. And the executives at headquarters every morning, the next morning, would want to see some reports, some calculations of average sales and all this kind of stuff, right? What are our top selling items? The way you do that is with a specific programming language called structured query language, or SQL, often pronounced SQL. And programmers who can do this kind of work of extracting the right data from databases and performing the right calculations on them, they're pretty valued. So let's get to the specifics, because I really want to illustrate, like, you're paid according to like the value you deliver. There were dozens upon dozens of hospitals in this company, and hundreds or even thousands of medical providers and clinics associated with it. And every single night, millions of records of data would come in from every single one of these hospitals and providers and everything, all into this central office we worked at. And of course, the managers of the company the next morning needed a report on everything that happened the day before. And so before this guy, Stephen, arrived at the company, someone had written a computer program in this language called structured query language. And its job was to process all of this information overnight. When they would run this program was about 900 lines long, 900 instructions long. And it would take 6.5 hours to run. And it was starting to be a real problem, because they could only start running it at the very end of the day, like 11 or 12 at night, when all the data had come in. And it was taking longer and longer, to the point where sometimes people would arrive at work the next morning and the report wasn't done yet, and they didn't have the data. It was a real problem. So Stephen sat down for about 2 weeks, and he took these instructions and he did what's called optimizing them. It just means make them better. He took these 900 lines of instructions and got the same thing down to 31 lines of instructions. And it took 30 minutes to run the process instead of 6.5 hours. How much money do you think he saved the company with those 2 weeks of work? So it's just a different industry, folks. You don't just get paid because you delivered 1 hour of time at your chair. You get paid because the problems you solve are of tremendous benefit to your employers. Now, what does that mean in concrete terms? Well, I'll be very specific on this one. The people that graduate from our boot camps on average get $60,000 a year as an entry-level position. Very few industries pay $60K a year on average as an entry-level position, and it goes up from there. An experienced engineer who's been, on the job for 2-3 years should make about $120,000 a year or more. Lots and lots of engineers make $180,000, $200,000 a year. There are senior level engineers and technologists that work at some of the larger companies that make $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year. It's all over the map, but it is really good pay with good benefits. All right, enough on that for the pro. So that was a lot of pros and cons, okay? I do want to say a little teeny bit here about how we address those pros and cons at our schools. We're trying to prepare people with our boot camps to have a successful long-term career. Now, we talked earlier about the creativity and constraints kind of issue. There's no way with a boot camp that lasts a matter of months that you can teach everything. Instead, what's really cool is we teach people, along with teaching you a bunch of material that we'll cover later on, we teach you how to self-teach and how to debug yourself, how to unstick yourself when you're grinding on something. More importantly, and I hope I've communicated some of this in the talk tonight, more importantly, we teach you how to think like a developer, how to think like an engineer. There are various ways of thinking that very often are based on the type of work you do. You probably observed this in your own life. Well, engineers think a certain way. We're all our own individuals. I'm me. I'm not anybody else. But the way I think in terms of technology is similar to nearly the way that nearly every other professional that I worked with thinks when they're solving a problem. It's pretty cool. And we teach you that, right? We also teach you how to, like I said, figure things out for yourself. We often hear engineers say, I get paid to Google things. Well, it's actually true. And by the way, this is a real key thing to learn about technology. I know we've used up a fair bit of your time. I really appreciate you sticking around here. We got some cool things coming up. So stay here. This is one final lesson I want to give you, is that in some academic disciplines, or even some types of jobs, it's really important to memorize a bunch of information that you can recall without having to look it up. We see it all the time in academia and in some jobs. The tech industry has none of that. What you're expected to know, and what we teach, is the principles behind the use of a specific tool or technology, why it's the right tool or isn't the right tool, and how to use it, okay? What does that mean? It means when you need to look up something specific about the right way to write a piece of code or the exact right technology to look at, you're going to Google that stuff. You're not expected to remember it or memorize everything, which is really, really nice, but it doesn't even matter if it's being nice. It's just the fact of the matter is that understanding the principles behind how to use these tools, these machines, these computers, and how to solve difficult problems is more important than knowing the specific way to write an exact command that you could look up anyway. All right. Last thing, we've talked about pros and cons. I want to stress that because we know what some of these cons are, our boot camps are designed to include lots of challenges. These are exercises where you might be tasked with completing something that you haven't explicitly been taught already, which will require you to research online and get answers to your questions. We do this on purpose because we know what some of the challenges are being in the industry, and we're going to prepare you as well as we can for them. As I mentioned, by the way, most graduates earn like $30 or more per hour, which equates to $60,000 a year. There's no guarantee of anything, right? But if you go through one of our programs and you get hired, this is what people are making on average, which is really good. Here's the last thing I want to say, because this is not meant to be some salesy thing right now. You know, it's this. Technology is for you if, one, you enjoy solving complex problems and are willing to experience the challenge and frustration that happens in the middle of the solving of that problem in exchange for the pure joy when you eventually figure out the solution. Technology is for you if you want a career that pays well but has good work-life balance, right? And technology is for you if you're willing and in fact thrive upon the fact that it is a business that mandates continuous learning. If you are excited about, or at least willing to confront the idea of continually needing to increase your knowledge level, then technology is for you. All right. So that's the presentation proper. Got a couple other really cool things to go over with you. So I've gone over a bit. I just want to share a lot more stories, but I do want to have an opportunity to answer questions. So what we're going to do is this. In a moment, when we go over the free gift that we're going to give you, I've got an email address that you all can use to get your free gift. But you can also use that exact same email when you send it in to just shoot me any questions. I see all of them. They're all forwarded to me. I answer every one of them. I do want to hear from you. Okay. And in particular on this kind of thing about the industry and what it's like, you know, whatever you've been curious about, I want to hear about it. I'll do the best I can to at least share my perspective on it and point you in the direction of other resources if I can. Okay. All right. So That said, there might be one or two questions we have in chat that we can answer. Let me look here real quick and see if there's some stuff. So, all right. Okay, so Manpreet has a really good question. He says, which jobs in tech pay 60K in entry-level roles? Like, are these for developers or QA or networking side? That's a great question. I want to stress something. If you are looking to be hired predominantly in the hardware side of things, i.e., networking or connecting computers or doing, administrative or system support kind of things, you're not going to make those kind of wages. For a lot of reasons, software developers and people who do jobs related to software development get paid dramatically more than those who work in the hardware side of things, i.e., networking computers and establishing them, communicating together and setting up email systems and all this kind of stuff. They don't get paid that well. They get paid decently. Don't knock it. They might make $50,000, $60,000 a year after they've been on the job for a year or two or three, but they might very well start at an entry-level job of $12 to $17 an hour, right? So to be specifically answer your question, the kinds of jobs that might make $30 an hour, which equates to $60,000 a year, are developer jobs, quality assurance jobs where you're doing testing, entry-level project manager jobs, these types of roles, things related to software development and not the hardware side like networking. I hope that's answered your questions. Arnold said another really great question. Now, this one I'm going to give a very short answer to. I could talk to you about it at length. He says, your thoughts on certifications. I have very definite opinions on certifications. The only certifications, in my opinion, and it's one dude's opinion, the only certifications that are worth anything in the software industry are cloud certifications. There are 3 cloud providers of magnitude: Azure from Microsoft, AWS from Amazon, and Google Cloud Platform from Google. Any one of those companies provides a lot of different cloud services and offers certification exams for being an expert in utilizing their technologies. And regardless of the platform, any one of those certifications is valuable on the market. Nothing else is. No other certifications matter. Now, obviously, I'm very adamant about that and very opinionated. But I'm telling you, after decades in and around this industry, looking around like there's other developers here, we don't give a rip about certs. What we care about is, 1, do you have the baseline knowledge level to be a part of the team? 2, can you think like an engineer and solve problems? 3, are you teachable? Or do you think you know it all already? And 4, are you a decent person? Would I like to have you on my team? That's what we care about. We don't care about a piece of paper. We don't care whether you have a degree or not. We don't care about certificates. We just care about those 4 things. And that's true whether you're just a regular engineer, or you're a technology lead, or you're an engineering manager, or you're a chief technical officer. They don't care about those things. I love that about this industry. We're pragmatic. Can you do the job? Awesome. Welcome to the team. Not, I've got a piece of paper that says Harvard on it or Yale. I don't care. Don't care at all. We can talk about that at length. So those are my thoughts on certifications. All right. So there's a lot of ones in here. I don't want to go too far. All right, Manpreet. Yeah, there's one that's got some detail in here. Manpreet, I want to answer that in detail. In a moment, you're going to see an email address you can use. Go ahead and send that question in because it's got some substance to it, which I appreciate, but I want to give you a very considered answer. And same thing, if I wasn't able to get to your questions in here, you'll see an email address in a moment. Please go ahead and send it in. I care about this a lot. I want to answer your questions. All right, so let's talk in a little more detail about who and what we are. Please stick around through this. Even if it seems like you're probably not ever going to do one of our boot camps, it's totally fine. I appreciate you staying. I've got a free gift for you at the end that I think you'll enjoy. And I just want the opportunity to share who and what we are, what we do. So we have these 12 boot camps. And by the way, that's more than any other boot camp in the country, right? We cover a whole bunch of subjects. You can see them on the screen. Everything from like cybersecurity, which we talked about earlier, mobile app development, This one over here, I'm really proud of, our artificial intelligence developer bootcamp. Put a lot of work into that thing. It's really, really awesome. And we cover, again, all these other subjects. In fact, we have more programs than any other coding bootcamp on earth, which is pretty cool. Now, another really thing that's awesome is what these programs are like. This is really hard to solve, but we solved it years ago and we're proud of it. They are self-paced, and yet they are instructor supported. That means you can move at whatever pace makes sense for you through your program, going faster on subjects that you really grasp really quickly, and being afforded the time to work through those subjects that you might not grasp so smoothly. And all the way along, you've got the support of instructors. Contrast that with, say, going to a college where a class starts on a specific day. You all have to go through the material at the exact same rate. And if you get left behind, you're in trouble. So our programs are self-supported or self-paced, which is pretty awesome. They're also flexible. Because they're self-paced, you can enroll 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and you set your own schedule. You don't have to wait until a bunch of people get ready to start or a specific launch day, which is really cool. Here's another thing. This is just something I talk about, something that's near and dear to my heart. It was very important to Jack and I when we put these programs together that we pay a tremendous amount of attention to setting you up to have a good long-term career. We looked at what had made me successful over decades and what makes other long-term technologists successful. And it wasn't always the specific technologies we're taught, but it was also those fundamentals, how to think like an engineer, how to plan your career. All of those things are covered so you've got some longevity in this career. We care about you 20, 30 years down the line, not just getting that first job. Okay, let's talk about the money part of it. Our programs are really affordable. Like I said earlier, they're priced under the national average. When you talk to one of our admissions personnel, you can find out more detail about that. You can also find out about our multiple financing options. We have upfront discounts, monthly payments. There's a lot of things. Another really huge thing is, how do you get that job? The technology of programming is not the technology of getting a programming job. They are two different technologies, but there is a technology to each. There's a successful pattern and actions you can take. And we do two things on the job area. We teach you that. There's an actual course you go through on how to get a job. And then we have our expert job placement specialists who will assist you at every turn. Okay. Another really cool thing, our programs are designed for absolute beginners. You don't have to have any prior coding knowledge or engineering knowledge before you go in. As long as you can read, write, and do basic arithmetic, you're going to be fine. You don't have to be a nerd. You can be a nerd if you want to. I'm a nerd, and it's awesome. But you can go in without any prior knowledge, right? So who are our programs for? These programs are for anyone who's looking for a better career. As we've covered today, you weigh the pros and cons, but technology is a great industry to work in, right? There's remote work opportunities, great work-life balance. It pays well. So after you've looked at the pros and cons, which we can help you with if you want, if you decide to go into tech, we will equip you well for that career. And it's not just us saying that. This is some of the awards we consistently land that we've received recently. We consistently land on the top, coding bootcamp awards lists every single year, and have for many, many years. It's also not just us saying it. These are what our students and graduates have said. We've got an average 4.8 stars review rating across all the major platforms out on the internet. This is based on student and graduate feedback, and we're very, very proud of this. We work really hard to get this kind of reaction and support from our graduates. So if you'd like more information and to get a free coding bootcamp guide, you can go to this link that Regina's popping into chat right now, learncodinganywhere.com/Erik. And it's a very quick sign up form. And you get that coding bootcamp guide and be able to find out more about who and what we are. I'm going to pause for a moment here for anybody who wants to go to that link to fill it in. Oh, and I have the next slide is this free gift and email address I've been talking about. So stick around. By the way, the notes at the bottom there are for people who've already created an account at our website. If you try to go to this contact form and you instead pop up in a login form, those are your credentials to get in right at the bottom of the screen. All right, just a few more seconds, we'll move on. Again, if you're at all interested, please fill out this form. All right, now, since our graduates love us, and they do, we've helped a lot of people over the years. It's very gratifying. Since our graduates love us, referrals are one of the top enrollment sources for us. And because of that, we actually have an official referral program. We pay a 5% commission payment for any enrollment. If you referred them and they sign up for one of our boot camps and pay, we will send you a check for 5% of that amount. It can be lucrative and you'll deserve it because you'll be changing their lives if they get into one of these programs. So how does this work? Well, in a moment, you're going to see this email address for the free gift. When you email in for that, just include your name and the contact info of anyone you're referring, and we'll register that. And if they sign up, you'll get a commission. All right, now we're talking about books, and we mentioned this a few different times. We've published 6 books and a dictionary. We've got 3 Learn Coding Basics in Hours books. We've got a coding book for kids and young adults, where I get made fun of a lot because Jack commissioned the illustrations and decided to make fun of me. We've got a Technology Basics Dictionary, which is phenomenal, a Project Management Handbook, and the book You Are Not Stupid. Now, I'm going to talk about You Are Not Stupid in a little more detail. No book like this exists, and I've looked for decades. Essentially, we have a course at the beginning of our boot camp called the Computer Basics course, and it's designed to remove all mystery from computers and technology. Any tiny or large confusion that our students have ever had about computers and technology and machinery and networking and Wi-Fi and all this stuff, all this technology that we're inundated with in our lives, we clear up every single confusion about that on the course. And so this book is an extension of that course, written for the world to be able to simplify computers and technology. It even shows the history of how we even arrived at the state of technology today, which, if you don't know that history, you can't have as full an understanding of technology and computers as you're going to need to use them well. So You Are Not Stupid. Yeah, obviously we're biased, but you'll see the reviews if you ever look this up on Amazon. People love this book and they should. They needed this book. I wish I had this book when I was a kid. All right, so free gift. This is our project management handbook that Jack and I wrote to simplify the concepts related to software project management. Creating software, as I've said a few times, takes a long time and it's expensive. Project management is meant to corral that process, minimize the time, minimize the expense, and produce a greater product. And it's something really valuable to learn about as a technologist or anyone interested in the technology industry. If you will email your full name and your mailing address to books@learncodinganywhere.com, we will send you your own physical copy of this book, absolutely free. Also in there, if you're sending that email, if you had a question you wanted to ask that I didn't get to, pop it in. It'll get forwarded to me. I'll answer it. And finally, in that email, if there's someone you think should find out more about the Tech Academy, throw their name in there, help give us contact data, and we will register you for that as referring them, and you'll get a commission if they sign up. All right, I'm going to take just a second here for anybody who wants to fill this email out to send it in. And then we'll have our final slide. All right. So there's a link that's going in the chat right now. There it is. This is our Linktree link. If you've ever used Linktree, you know what it is. If not, it's just a place to aggregate all the links for you or your company. In here, you're going to find links to our free educational YouTube video playlist, which, by the way, this video will go on that YouTube playlist within a day or so, as do all of these videos that we do, right? These free classes. You'll also find links to our books and our dictionary, all of our upcoming events. You'll find links in there if you want to attend more of these, and you'll see all of our social media accounts. So what we're going to ask you to do is, one, follow us on social media. We super appreciate it. It helps. And you're the first to know when we do new things, right? Invite your friends to future meetups. In particular, anyone's at all interested in AI, this ChatGPT meetup we're going to do shortly is going to be really, really cool. Okay. But you'll see a list of all of them when you go to Linktree and click on our, upcoming events. And then I have a special ask that could help you. If you will do the following, you'll be entered in to a contest to win your own copy of You Are Not Stupid. All we ask is that you'll share a link to the next event or to our events page on social media. Something says, hey, I went to this class from Tech Academy, super loved it. You should go too. And here it is, if you'll tag the Tech Academy when you share us, we're going to track those tags, throw you into the ring for winning one of these, and we'll pick one of them random out of that hat and send you your own copy of You Are Not Stupid. It's a really good book. It's really good. But it's also really big. We can't afford to wait to give a bunch of them for free, but we'll give you one if you will, or we'll throw you in the ring to get one in a raffle, if you will. If you will tag us, tag the Tech Academy on social media. We'd super appreciate it. All right. And by the way, we'll announce the winner at the next event. And we've reached the end. What are the next steps for you? Well, again, if you want to find out more about who and what we are, go to learncodinganywhere.com/Erik, fill out that quick form, and it'll tell you more. Please do come to more of these and tell your friends about them. We love doing these. I love the questions, by the way. Love your questions and what you guys have asked. And if there's other classes you're interested in, throw that into that email. Let us know what you want to do, because we're here to service you. We're here to help. I'll stick around for a moment just to see if there's any more questions I have time to answer. But at this point, we're done. Appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a wonderful and warm evening.